Let go of your reality and step into a realm beyond your wildest dreams.
A place where the veil between the living and the dead is paper thin.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. I'm Mike Brown.
And I'm Morgan Knutson. Join us and the world's leading experts as we deep dive into stories about poltergeists, cryptids, and other tales of the unexplained. Search for and follow Supernatural Circumstances on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Weird Together, the show where we celebrate the latest and greatest in independent horror films. I'm Brendan Storr, host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast.
And I am Joseph Kamau, host of The Cardinal Rule.
We're not critics.
We're not experts.
We're just weird together. Joseph, my friend, how are you?
I'm good. I'm kind of at this point. I've got this kind of stage I go through when the semester ends where I don't do shit for like 2 weeks. Right. And I just kind of take on no responsibilities. And I've just come out of that right now. So I'm on summer break and I'm now at the point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to do some things productive, but I'm not going to do too much. So I get myself like one thing I want to get done each day. So I just feel like I'm getting a little bit done and I'm not being a complete lazy piece of shit, but I'm still living the good life, being a professor and having, kind of a cool laid back summer. So overall, I'm doing well. Brent, how are you?
Good, man. Good. I'm good. I'm back in Victoria, as you can tell from my terribly cluttered backdrop, which I have not yet had time to make camera ready. This place always looks like a bomb goes off because it's my office, Joseph, and I'm a cluttered man. But no, other than that, I'm good. I'm settling back in after 8 months in Montreal and really just kind of loving being home and being with my wife, being with my cats. Got my nice television so I can watch movies like the film we're about to cover and just sort of enjoy myself. So no, I'm very good. And I'm looking forward to talking about this film because this is, I think, the first returning creative team we've had on this show, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, that film is Bury the Bride. And now Bury the Bride tells the story of the bachelorette party from hell, which is saying something because I don't know about bachelorette parties, but I've been to one bachelor party, not for me. And of course, this film goes all kinds of places. And we will say, if you have any, basically, we're going to spoil the shit out of this movie. So if you want to preserve the secret, I do suggest that. Well, Jesus, leave it open in a window or something. We need the views, but
we'll take the views. Yeah.
Go
watch the film and then come back. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. The audio version of this will post in like a week or something. So, but the audio only version. But anyways, yes, and of course it is directed by Spider One, who also directed Allegoria. And it was written by him and Chrissy Fox, who was one of the stars of Allegoria, which, again, we did previously on this show. And, of course, before we break down Bury the Bride, we have to talk about what you go into a movie with, because you never watch a movie entirely on its own, Joseph. We always like to say that you bring every other movie into the theater or into the living room with you, because this was a Tubi exclusive. And so before we talk about Bury the Bride, we have to talk about the baggage. All right. So, Joseph, what was your baggage going into Bury the Bride?
Well, as you mentioned, we had reviewed or discussed Allegoria, which was by the same team that did this film. So I already had that going into, which is most of the films we talk about. Because I'm kind of new to what we're doing, and don't have kind of the back catalog you do in terms of viewing indie horror films. A lot of times it's the first film I've seen from the filmmakers. So this is one of the few times where I was familiar with their work. So certainly that came in with me. But also, after we did that episode on Allegoria, we both had some interactions on social media with Spider One. He commented that he had listened to it and he was so gracious. I mean, he was great. I mean, I became a fan of just him as a person. And I've watched some interviews with him, really down to earth, really laid back. And you and I have kind of talked about this. He's achieved some success in the music industry, obviously. And
I would say more than some success. I mean, he's a legitimate rock star.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting because people who become very successful often are kind of down to earth. I mean, there's always exceptions. The people who are kind of full of themselves are often the aspirational types. It seems
Sure.
like who are trying to get there. I know you and I've talked about this offline before, but like, he just seems like a good guy, down to earth, is very humble in his interviews and personable, and he was very kind and gracious in our interactions. So I kind of go into this a little bit of a fan, and so certainly that's some of the baggage I brought in going into this film.
Yeah, same here. And again, you and I have talked about this extensively offline, but yeah, that makes a difference, man. And again, it was just a little thing. It's not like he spent a lot of time on it, but we tried to. Obviously, I made some pretty glib jokes that, in retrospect, just being a little bit, I'm a little bit older and wiser now, and I think that was maybe not necessary. But he was still very gracious, and again, it was just a little thing. But he's the only filmmaker we've covered on this show to do that, and then who gives a fuck, right? Like we have, we love our audience, but we don't have a massive audience or anything, so we don't expect anyone to reach out to us. That's just not the nature of the game. But still, that he did was very welcome. And we're going to talk more in the Talk-to-Gon about blue collar filmmaking, because it's very much a blue collar film, and that's certainly not a pejorative. I think that's a thing to be admired. But yeah, so that sort of set me up to appreciate it, definitely. Yeah. The other thing was, it was a Tubi exclusive, which kind of surprised me, because Tubi's great. I mean, Tubi is one of the running jokes among film critics and people on film Twitter is like, Tubi's going to win the streaming wars. After everything collapses, Tubi's going to be the one that's still standing. And I guess, I thought maybe it might go with a larger distributor, but I mean, so many people use Tubi. I think that's maybe the best way for this to get eyes on, So I think that surprised me, but I don't think it in any way sort of made me doubtful about the film's quality, if that makes sense. So, no, I think that in terms of baggage, I think that was it. That was it for me as well. I think you basically covered it.
Real quick, I want to say Derek is in the chat. Good evening,
Derek.
From Derek. So, thank you for being with us, and thank you for anyone else who's hanging out with us. Appreciate you hanging out with us on this fine evening.
Absolutely. All right, Joseph. Well, we have covered the baggage, and now it's time to really talk about the meat of the thing. And there's only one place we can do that. That's the Talk-to-Gon.
Welcome to the Talk-to-Gon. 2 men enter. 2 men leave?
All right, my friend. Why don't you get us started? What did you think of Bury the Bride?
So overall, I enjoyed it. And I thought it was nice to see Spider-One and Chrissy Fox do something different than Allegoria.
Yeah.
Obviously they're leaning into the horror film genre, but they did something different. And the more I've sat with it, I really appreciated the feel and the style of it. There were a few critiques that we had, and it was his first film, and I think he would probably have critiques looking at it himself. But I like the style of Allegoria better just in general, but I appreciated that he did something different that was maybe a more standard kind of horror film. So it was nice to see him being aware enough of the threat of being kind of a one-trick pony, right? And kind of going and trying something different. I know you've watched some interviews with him, and I did just, recently, and he talked about with their next film, they're trying to do something different as well. And so I think that was nice to see.
Yeah, very much so. I also liked the film quite a bit. And I appreciated that not only did they change things up from Allegoria, but I thought it represented a really significant progression in terms of filmmaking skill.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Allegoria was good. I really enjoyed it, but it was a bit of a shaggy dog in terms of its construction, whereas this is so much more tight and so much slicker. Yeah. And when you consider, I discovered this when doing research for the show, they shot it in 7 fucking days.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
7 and night shoots. So 7 days of night shoots. It's ridiculous. I mean, right. I cannot imagine how difficult that must have been. And apparently they were fighting weather. There was always blowing wind rather. It was blistering hot in the day and freezing cold at night. There were rattlesnakes and spiders. Absolutely crazy stuff. So, but despite all that, it was still, I thought a real quantum leap over Allegoria in terms of quality. And there's some stuff, again, we'll talk about a little bit later that I've heard Spider say in interviews about just kind of wanting to grow and improve. And that's something that you and I have talked about with this. I mean, obviously we're not artists at that level, but I think that's a sign of a great artist, is when you say, okay, I've done this thing and I've done it, but now I want to be better. I don't want to just do the same thing over and over again. I want to be better. And I think that's true of his musical career. I have to say I'm not as familiar with Knee-High Fox, with Christy Fox's band, but I respect that. I respect that drive to be better each time, to do something different each time, because it's easy to do the same shit. That's something that there are a handful of filmmakers out there who do that every time they try and do something a little bit different. And I mean, that can actually be I've heard that can actually be a net negative for a filmmaker. The filmmaker Adam Green, I used to listen to his Movie Crypt podcast quite a bit. And this is a guy who's done sitcoms and horror and sort of thrillers. And he said that he was told, you should really kind of stick in one box because it's easier to sell you as a talent if people know you for a thing. So again, just another reason to admire the creative team behind this film for doing something different.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that comes from maybe some freedom that they have because they've already built their careers, in music.
Yeah.
And they're trying to become good filmmakers and do, and grow that. But I maybe there's a little less desperation and more freedom to kind of do what feels creatively right to them. So I think that might be part of why they do that.
Yeah, that could very well be.
Yeah, you described the film as kind of very kind of well put together and a little tighter, than Allegoria, and I would agree with that. I think Allegoria was a little more unique, and there were some things about that I kind of really enjoyed about kind of that aspect of it. But this felt a little more like a professional film in terms of that, kind of those pieces of it. A little more conventional in terms of the way it all fit together. The acting I thought was pretty solid. I mean, we've watched a lot of films with spotty acting.
No.
Overall it was all pretty good here in this film, I thought.
Yeah, that was something that really jumped out at me, not just the acting, but the characterizations. I think the acting is strong because, at least in part, because the writing is strong. Mm-hmm. I think, I could be wrong. I'm not a filmmaker, right? But I think if you've got 6 days to do something, you got to know what you want from your people, and they have to be able to give it to you. And that has to be kind of, I think, spelled out in the script. You can't riff if you got 7 days.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
That really, again, I think the strength of it was the characterizations, because the buildup, of course, the bachelorette party is the two sisters, Sadie and June, and then their friends, Carmen, Lizzie, and I want to say Betty, but I don't know if that's right. I think the actress's name was Katie, but regardless, you've got the friends, and they really felt like a lived-in world. It felt like people you would know, people you could know, and it just felt like a very real set of relationships, particularly the sister relationship between June and Sadie. You believed it. So
the party was Sadie, June, Carmen, Liz, and Betty.
Betty. Okay, so I was right. It was Betty. Yeah. And no, absolutely. So I think that works because the characters work.
Real quick, I want to say hey to Rin, who's joined us. Hi guys, sorry I'm late. Lost track of last Wednesday month. Appreciate you being with us. The interview I watched with Spider and Chrissy, they talked about that a bit, those relationships, and I think it was a combination of the actors and intentionality. So on the intentionality side, Spider-One was talking about how they wanted to write the women characters in a way that was, realistic. In the interview, he was talking about how he wanted to write them as flawed people, that there's this pressure as sort of, kind of in art filmmaking because of the marginalization of women to maybe back away from depicting them as imperfect, right? And so it's a delicate dance, or delicate line of how to write that in a way that is not, kind of hearkening back to the marginalization of women. And I think they did a good job of that. So, that was intentional, that they wanted to have these the sister relationship kind of complicated, the friendship relationships complicated. But I think it's also the actors, because, Chrissy was talking about her close friendship with Scout, who plays June, they're close friends. And actually, I think many of the actors in this were also in Allegoria. So I think a lot of them are kind of friends that kind of probably work together and have those relationships. The character June was Ivy from Allegoria, right? The woman who was on a date with the guy and she killed him, right? Now I happen to know, it's just because I looked it up. I didn't catch this myself, but Carmen and Liz were the women in the scene from the film Big Baby that was in Allegoria. They were the two women that was running away from, there's a little segment of a fictitious film. So they were in there. And then, you may, I don't know if you might have caught this, Mike, one of the guys, he was the Whistler in Allegoria.
Yes.
The actor Adam Markinowski. So I think those that probably helped them quite a bit, those existing friendships, to make those relationships between those women in the film feel very realistic and complicated and authentic.
Yeah, there was a moment, again, before the turn, because the film has a turn. There was a moment where Sadie, Chrissy Fox, and June, Scout Taylor Compton, they're kind of sniping at each other about Sadie's divorce. And again, having seen that variations of that conversation, again, just felt very, very real. And this is not an original thought to me. I've seen other people say this, but I very much agree. If the film had just been about this bachelorette party, I actually would have watched it. As far as as dramatic tension goes, if it was just about these people in a cabin hashing out their shit, I probably would have just watched that. It was compelling enough that I think that it would have worked. And then, of course, June's mysterious fiance David turns up with his asshole friends. And again, I've met those people. I'm from a small town in the mountains. I've met those guys, and I don't like them very much. Now, and I know in interviews, Spider and Chrissy have said they wanted to make those guys as smart and likable as the girls. And I thought, well, no, they're clearly not stupid, but likable is not happening.
Right.
But again, that's me because I grew up around people like that and I just can't fucking stand them. But again, very realistic in the depiction of it. That sort of gruff, what's the word I'm looking for? Gruff, take it or leave it. I'm laughing at something that only I think is funny, and I'll not tell you what it actually is, because they want to try and provoke a reaction of insecurity. It all rings very true. And I mean, I wanted them all to fall down a very deep hole. So, poked some landmines I didn't realize were there.
Yeah, I do think I think they did a good job of making those characters, avoiding them being, kind of too much of a cliche in terms of, they, like you mentioned, like I saw him say that similar thing. He wanted them to be charming and smart in their own way. And, maybe they weren't likable, but like you could see how, some of the characters maybe had a little bit of a ability to control social situations with their personality, right? They certainly were not stupid. They may not have been quote unquote cultured to know what that wine was, but they weren't stupid, right?
Yeah, I think the character was it Mike, the big guy from Allegoria? When he's flirting with Carmen, I mean, yeah, I've seen that work. I've seen that interaction between the very, very beautiful party girl and the slightly gruff but still has some mojo, mountain man guy. I mean, there's a story a long time ago, but I used to date a girl who worked in a bar and spent a lot of time in a bar. It was a different time in my life, but she was the kind of girl like guys would try and do shit to impress her. So there was one guy, he bit in, like he said, I can chew glass. There's a trick to it. There's all these old guys. Like, there's a trick. I'll teach you how to knife fight. It's all this horse shit. But this one guy's, I'll teach you how to bite glass. And he literally bit his pint glass in front of her and started chewing it. And of course he started bleeding, and it was just a whole thing. But there was, if I said she wasn't at all impressed, I think I'd be lying a little bit. So those guys have a certain amount of charm, a certain amount of mojo, and it worked. And again, if it had just been about the awkwardness there, again, I would have watched. Although I will say, if I was in that situation, really, I'm out. One, you've dragged me out to the goddamn desert.
Right.
No. 0 stars already. I don't like Las Vegas. I would rather go to Las Vegas and go to some cabin in the friggin' desert. So strike 1. Strike 2, your fiance turns up. Like, if I'm imagining this from a man's point of view, oh, good, we're going to be hanging out with your girlfriend who I don't like already. Good. Well, this is fantastic. This is just, are we going to play some board games? Let's just make this as worse as it possibly could be. Maybe you can have a domestic argument in front of me and then just be really quiet and make the room tense for the rest of the night. Nah, just the cherry on top, you know? So again, there's a lot of shit that I just thought, this is not for me. And again, I think would have made for a compelling drama if it had just been a drama. But of course, it was not a drama because spoiler, those motherfuckers are vampires.
I appreciated the twist, and I didn't watch or read anything about the film, beforehand. In that regard.
I went in blind.
Yeah, so I didn't know that was coming. I enjoyed the way they revealed it. It obviously, when you see it with the reveal, you're like, oh shit! It's like that DiCaprio meme, pointing at the screen, right? When he's taking the selfie with her, right? And I really enjoyed it. It caught me off guard, and that doesn't happen very often. It's hard for a film to catch me off guard like that these days. And, I thought it was going to be just an Escape from the Hillbillies movie. And so I appreciated that, right? Derek saying, with that reveal, I was going, okay, they're hillbilly serial rapists. Wait, vampires, really? So, yeah. So, I just thought they were going to murder her and bury her, right? I think that's probably what the intent was, to set it up with the shovel, right? And so it was the twist was appreciated.
Oh, yeah. And again, I thought the way they chose to reveal it with the selfie, I thought that was great. That was clever. No, that was really, really good. And even, again, prior to the reveal, as she's driving away, as Carmen is driving away with the guys, under the guys that they're going to go hunting. Have you ever seen the Australian film Wake in Fright?
I have not.
So it's on Shudder. It was directed by the great Ted Kotcheff, who would go on to direct Stallone in First Blood, the first Rambo film. But it is this, in a way, it's kind of like a horror movie about this Australian teacher in a small town who's really from the big city, but he has to work off his school debt by teaching in these small towns. He loses all his money while on his way home for Christmas, playing gambling in this tiny, tiny town when he has to get off the train. And he's broke. He can't get home. And he ends up in this days-long bacchanal with these characters who are actually not all that dissimilar from David and Mike and the guys in the film. And it's a horror show. And I don't know if that was an intentional, not an homage exactly, but if that was an intentional sort of nod in that direction, but it had that feeling because Carmen obviously threw herself into that situation. And she strikes me as the kind of person who, and again, I've met people like this who, they're very beautiful. They're very commanding, and they sort of get this idea that, well, I can manipulate my way out of a situation if I need to. Like there's no situation I can put myself in that I can't somehow talk my way out of, or assert my power out of. And as Carmen discovers, that's not the case. And certainly I've known people who've had that experience in real life. They thought, well, no, I got this. Well, not vampires, yeah.
Okay.
Emotional vampires.
Okay, there you go. Real quick, Rin saying that smells like a Stephen King twist, and then it's a big bug. Get it? Yeah.
That's not fair. I feel like late stage Stephen King, especially, this is better than that. But yeah. So I appreciated the twist again, and I like that sort of that, for me, Wake and Fright vibe. It also gave me Near Dark vibes. I don't know if you've ever seen Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark. It's sort of a Western vampire film set in Texas, as if I remember right, about this sort of roving group of vampires in the not the West, but kind of in the Grand Desert, and it again just has a little bit of that.
Nice. I want to talk about going back to the film craft. One of the things that I think Spider-One as a filmmaker does well is he seems to be really good with the setting up the shots and the lighting and all of that type of film craft. And especially I knew they shot it over a short period of time, but I didn't realize it was 7 days. And to get, I think they did a hell of a job considering that. And like for me, there was one particular shot that I really enjoyed. The scene that I really liked was, they're in the kitchen, and when the knock on the door happens, I love the way the shot was set up, just, kind of from the hall. I love that you have the knock, and then everyone's just quiet and they stare. They don't say a thing, and the camera just slowly zooms in. And the shot was lit beautifully. It was perfect. And it was just, it was a great shot and scene. Just the way that, like, a lesser filmmaker would have had them talk immediately. And the fact that he just left that silence, and it felt realistic, like a knock on the door in the situation. What are you going to do? And yeah, that scene really stood out to me.
Well, what's interesting about that to me is, you and I have talked a lot recently about films which are built for streaming. As particularly the film which will not be named. The filmmakers specifically said they built it to adhere to Tubi algorithms, and it felt just so hollow, because the film consequently felt hollow.
Yeah.
And whereas this, you have a film which is very much a singular artistic vision, but is still released that way, and it kind of gives you hope a little bit for that platform. That you can still make something that hews to an original vision and get it out there without having to pander to the algorithm. That said, I was looking at Letterboxd today, because a lot of people review movies on Letterboxd. I don't. I just like to keep lists of what I've seen because I'm a big list nerd. But only 400 people on Letterboxd had logged this film, which is a fucking tragedy.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's an outcome of having done it this way. Maybe the algorithm does not favor it for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing, but
yeah, I'm
hoping that more people find the film, because I think it's very much worth being found.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really intrigued by the description of their next film. I guess part of maybe what I'm hoping is that even if this doesn't get picked up, or doesn't get a lot of attention, they're putting in their time, they're putting in their kind of their reps on doing film, and each film's going to get that much better, right? And if they stick with, which I'm sure they will, I think at some point people are going to start, kind of catching on to their films, especially as they continue to hone their craft a bit.
Yeah, the new film is going to be called Little Bites. I read what the description was. I don't recall anymore. But I think they should be starting to shoot it pretty soon. I think they said they're going to start shooting.
Yeah, they'll be starting in June. Yeah.
So yeah, something I wanted to ask you about that. One of the vampires, he is a character played by Chaz Bono, the character of Puppy.
Yeah. And
partway through the second act, or the back half of the film, rather, not the second act, might even be the second act actually. Puppy is revealed to be a victim of these guys, and is sort of a he was, because we find out that these guys, every couple of years, they lure someone else out to the property with this idea that they're going to get married. They kill everyone, drink their blood, and then they do it again once the heat dies down. And so Puppy says that, well, the year before it was his sister, and they killed his sister, they killed his family. He himself used to sell insurance. Now he's just their slave, basically. And after he says this, Chrissy shoots him. Sadie shoots him because she doesn't believe him.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about that, because I like Chaz Bono's performance of the character, and I think what the character, if I had to guess, I think the character was saying something that was true. But it seemed an odd thing to bring up and then never develop or pay off in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably, from my viewpoint, probably was telling the truth as well, especially with the way that they treated the character throughout, the rest of the guys. I think that was sort of one of those kind of badass, I'm taking charge moment, I don't care kind of a thing. Like, there's a series of films, and I'm trying to remember what it was called, but I've seen them. It's sort of this revenge film. There's 3 films in the series, and there's a woman who's a assaulted and nearly killed, and then comes back and kills the people, right? And who
Probably I Spit on Your Grave.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, and I remember. So if you've seen those, the first one, there's the one character who you almost feel sorry for, who's kind of like the kind of, I don't want to talk too much about that film, but who was still part of what happened to her, but he was kind of, I think he had some learning disabilities and was kind of manipulated in the whole situation. And in that film, she was like, I don't care, and she still got her revenge on him as well, right? So I think there's that sort of a thing in a film. There's a precedent for that kind of thing, and it's sort of this moment where what you're doing is you're getting the audience to have some sympathetic feelings for this character and thinking, oh, okay, maybe she will let him go, and then you're like, no, and still exercises her revenge or whatever's going on, and it becomes a shocking moment. It's a different way to kind of shock your audience.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair. I can, seen from that perspective, I can see it. Also, how great is it that for a guy who, when we started the show, said, I don't really watch horror movies, you're now, as seen in I Spit on Your Grave 1 through 3. I love this. This makes me very happy.
You see what you've done to me. I blame you, Bren.
Yeah, that's fair. One other thing that I thought didn't work before, because there's some more things I want to talk about that do work, but I feel like it's important to cover all the bases. One of the few things I thought didn't work is I felt like some of the action beats felt maybe rushed.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to say clumsily staged, but they're perhaps not as fluidly staged as could be. But recognizing that it was shot, they were shooting like 12 and a half pages a day. I mean, it's going to happen, right? But I did kind of feel that, especially towards like when the turn, not the turn, but sort of in the end of Act 2 after they're captured. Again, my I don't fuck off about act structure, so I'm pardon me if I'm getting this wrong, but yeah, when the women are captured and held in the barn, I felt like there was a couple little bits there that I just thought, it moves in a very clunky way. When she takes the gun and shoots Mike, I thought that happened very slowly. I feel like these guys are what they are. Someone could have stopped that. But again, I wonder if that's just a function of, we got 2 shots at this,
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. That's probably one of those areas to continue to improve. No, that makes a lot of sense. Something, sort of some of that just didn't make sense other than a plot device to keep them alive. Why did they drag them out to the barn? I guess they wanted to toy with them. I don't know. Yeah, some of that kind of felt a little clunky. So I think you're right about that.
In fairness, they're in good company, because I watched The Gray Man on the flight home from Montreal, which is the mega budget Netflix film starring Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans, directed by the Russo brothers, who directed Avengers Endgame. And there is almost exactly the same thing that happens in that. It's a completely different setup, but there is a moment about the halfway point where literally a single bullet and the movie's over, problem solved. And they just go, well, we got to get out of here. I don't know that you do. I think this is a problem that solves itself very quickly. But again, otherwise, if we don't do that, there's no movie. So this is, again, if nothing else, this is not an uncommon thing.
Yeah. What did you think about the end with if you're this far into the show and you're upset about spoilers, you have only yourself to blame. Yeah, right. But in terms of when she buries all the friends and kind of the pet cemetery sort of thing going on at the end, and I kept saying that in my head, like when she was doing that, I was like, haven't you ever watched Pet Cemetery? This is a bad idea. But what was your thought on that?
I loved it. And this was one of the things I wanted to talk about. So I'm really happy you asked me. I felt like the statement there was that they wanted to show the resilience of women in the face of male violence. There's this great line. Have you ever seen Once Upon a Time in the West?
I've not. No.
So there's this moment where the main character, who was once she was a prostitute, and she's being threatened by one of the anti-heroes. And I actually have the quote here because I wanted to bring it up. She says to him, when you're finished, because he's threatening her with sexual violence, she says, when you're finished, all I'll need will be a tub of boiling water and I'll be exactly what I was before with just another filthy memory. And she says that to him just to say, I'm not scared of this thing you're threatening me with. Like, it would suck, but I'll live and you don't mean anything. And I kind of felt like that was my takeaway. You know, these guys, really, they're egotists. You know, they've been around for a long time. They've been doing this for a long time. One of the strengths of the performance of the actor who plays David is he really plays it like a little prince. You know, for all his, you know, this is the real America bullshit, he is still this egotistical little princeling.
Yeah.
Because he's the king of his little castle. And he thinks that, well, this is, you know, who can stop me? I am the one who does violence. I am the one who is scary. And so these women have shown him, like, no, you're not shit. You know, whatever it is you do, we're still here. Yeah. And you're just another story we're going to tell each other.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I really enjoyed that, because that's one of the problems I have with slasher films. Not that this was a slasher, but it just, you start to like the characters and then they're just systematically murdered one by one. And because it's almost a downside in a slasher film when you have really well fleshed out characters, because I mean, I'm getting old. You know, I don't necessarily want people to die badly, especially if I like them. I want them to go have a nice weekend. And so this allows kind of both things. You get that thrill of the, oh shit, but now they're back. And like I said, none of this shit mattered. It changes things, because violence always does. You know, you're never the same person after violence, but you're still there. You know, the core you is still untouched. And I kind of thought that was, an interesting, I thought that was a cool way to portray that, because something else I thought the film did really well was this idea that in the city, people who are from comfortable backgrounds, who are in comfortable situations, especially, and I'll admit it, like, I'm a left-wing guy, I lean left, but I also really have a problem with a lot of people on the left, because I think they live in a bubble.
Yeah.
And I mean, everyone does, right? Everyone lives in a bubble, but I don't hang out with the people on the right who live in bubbles. I hang out with people on the left who live in bubbles. And they get really complacent and really kind of, in some ways, not everyone, just some people I've met, they get really up their own asses. We'll just put it that way. And there's something in this film that made me think of that, because after Carmen disappears while hanging out with David and the guys, the girls go nuts. And when David and the guys come back without her, Liz demands to be taken to her. And Liz is, you know, she's portrayed as sort of the nerdy one, the intelligent one. She's reading the whole time. And she starts berating David in the car, like loudly berating him for being irresponsible and for not taking care of her friend. And I can't imagine a situation where you are less well advised to do that. You know, like, again, I've met dangerous hillbilly people, Joseph. I've met gangsters and murderers. You know, like, if these people have fucked up, or even if you think maybe they might be this thing, you don't harangue them when you are at their mercy. Yeah. But if you have spent your life being really comfortable and, you know, calling people out and doing whatever online or in your little social circle, where the worst that'll happen to you is, you know, someone will talk shit about you at the next coffee clutch, you lose touch with that with the immediacy of danger. And I really felt like that with that situation with Liz. And again, just watching her harangue this guy, we know he's a murderer. She doesn't. But even if you don't know he's a murderer, he's clearly not a very nice guy. Yeah. And you are totally helpless. And all your moral superiority. It's like the cyclists who give shit to people in cars, you know, and they cut in front of them. I'm like, dude, your reduced carbon footprint is not a free pass from God. You're still, if you get hit by a speeding car, you're going to get hit by a speeding car.
Yeah. I mean, without getting into too deep into all that, I generally have kind of a similar feeling. Like, you know, I'm originally from a larger city. I've up until moving 10 years ago, roughly, I moved here to Southwest Georgia for the job I have. And I live in a pretty small community, about 17,000 people. But prior to that, I had always lived in major metropolitan areas, the Phoenix area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I moved to this small rural area that's 2.5 hours from a major city. And there's just some, you know, there's definitely a different understanding of life, of even entitlement, you know, like you mentioned like the danger of, this character is used to living in a city where the worst that's going to happen, like you said, is kind of just, having to get into an argument or have someone say whatever they're going to say about them. But in a big city, like in polite, kind of large city life, you're generally pretty safe from so, I mean, violence happens, but from those interactions are kind of normal for her to be able to say things like that. Yeah, there's a different side of it that's not just like the whole kind of violence thing, like bringing it maybe to more everyday life in a small community. Kind of what people say about each other, kind of, you don't want to show your ass, so to speak, as they say. You want to be polite. Like, this is a thing I've come to realize. You live in a small community like this, everyone knows each other, right? The newspaper here will puts in the, if you get arrested for DUI, it's in the newspaper, right?
Oh,
and
man.
Yeah, and it's kind of public shaming, and it's interesting. As a sociologist, as much as gossip and things like that are things we don't like as people, there's sort of a pro-social aspect to it, that it keeps people in line, that they don't want to be, kind of ostracized from the tribe, so to speak. So there's a whole other side of it that's not just the whole kind of, okay, she's in a dangerous situation. Why maybe she should maybe not, kind of be so brazen, in that maybe she should have a little more survival instinct. But also, like, even like in everyday life where maybe it's not putting your life at risk, people who come from cities who are used to maybe having a little bit more of that entitled kind of mindset of, I can kind of just demand to see the manager when I don't get what I want, and I can be, kind of an ass about it. You're in if you move to a place like where I live now and you're like that, yeah, you can do that. And they'll be like, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. But you do that enough and you'll get a reputation, and there's kind of the social consequences. And, there's the negatives that come with that dynamic in small communities as well. I get why there's kind of that rural urban kind of divide. And, I think there's stereotypes both ways. And one of the things one of the things I've enjoyed about teaching in a small rural community like this in the South is, for all the things that may be still problematic in this part of the country, it's really helped me to see how those stereotypes about the South, the people of the South, are also themselves problematic. And, I've met some amazing people who someone who is not from here might, kind of write them off as whatever, whatever stereotype they want about them. But you get to know people and you start to realize that, how flawed those stereotypes are. So anyway, yeah, that whole sort of entitledness that comes from how she carried herself was an interesting note there.
Yeah, again, it just as part of the larger theme of resilience against violence.
Yeah.
And how the characters responded to that just really jumped out at me. And I know there's going to be some people who listen to this who say, well, that's a very male thing. You shouldn't have to be. But I've hitchhiked, a fair bit in my life, not so much anymore, because you get older, you realize what you're risking. But, when I would do that, people sometimes would say shit that I really disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
And you just shut the fuck up, because I don't have the power in that situation. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a small person. I'm not a weak person, but I'm in someone else's car.
Right.
And I don't know who they are. I don't know what they're capable of. And you just got to read the room. So I really felt like it was very much a part of that character and sort of the situation they brought. And that the sort of the crossing of the two worlds that they've talked about in interviews. They wanted to show when you have these two groups of people kind of butting up against each other. And that is a very real thing. And even if, again, they hadn't been vampires, that would still be a very risky thing to do.
Right.
I'd like to think most of the people I hitchhiked with weren't vampires. There's some I probably would.
Well, the good news is, if they were, you were charming enough or something about you enough that they decided to leave you be.
Probably just too much cholesterol. They were gonna have a heart attack the moment they drained me.
Right.
Look at the triglycerides in this kid. Woo. So no, I think, yeah, overall I loved. I shouldn't say no. I loved Bury the Bride. I've seen it twice. I'll probably watch it again. If they do a physical release the way they did with Allegoria, I'll pick it up. I wish I could have seen it on the big screen. I think it's a film that would really benefit from that environment. to be honest, I was in Montreal when it played at Salem, and I looked at the cost of getting down there, but it just was not within my budget because I thought this is probably going to be one of my only opportunities to see it on a big screen.
Yeah,
but just wasn't in the cards.
I think it was a solid second film. Again, there were some areas for where there's opportunities for improvement, but that again, they filmed it in 7 days, so I think that's to be expected. And I genuinely look forward to the next film. And with what they've described it as, I think in terms of there's some potential in terms of the kind of what it's going to be about, and I think it's going to be a little bit darker, moodier kind of thing, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. I couldn't agree more. I don't have anything for the boost, but I am going to recommend something for folks to check out if they liked this. It's not an independent film, but if you haven't seen it, John McTiernan's Nomads, I think shares some notes with this. It's from 1986, stars Pierce Brosnan. It is about an anthropologist who comes home to Los Angeles after being away somewhere, anthropologying, and ends up catching notice of this group of kind of like punk thugs who are just running chaotically through the city, and he becomes fascinated by them and tries to figure out who they are and where they come from. And there's something about it. There's just a handful of little bits that I think jibe really well with this film. And again, that sort of I can't quite nail it down, and we're running out of time, so I'm not going to try and develop this further. But yeah, I would say if you're looking for something to pair with Bury the Bride, or you want something to watch after, I think John McTiernan's Nomads would be thematically similar enough to scratch that itch. All right, my friend, where can everyone find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at JoKomo13, JOKOMO13. And if you happen to be into NFL football, check out the Cardinal Rule on YouTube. It's kind of my other content creation gig.
I am on Twitter and Instagram and Blue Sky as Largely the Truth. And I am, of course, on the Ghost Story Guys podcast with Paul Bestel. You'll find that everywhere fine podcasts live. Our music is composed and performed by Elliot Wilder of The Revenants. You can find The Revenants at therevenants1.bandcamp.com, and you'll find their music also streaming on streaming platforms everywhere. Our theme song is Rest in Peace from the album Music from Big Beige. And coincidentally, Spider got his start in Boston. That is where Elliot is living right now. So
nice.
One of those, it's a great city to hang out in. It's a lousy city to drive in. And I guess that's going to do it, my friend.
Yeah.
So we'll be back with an audio version in 2 weeks. And until then, well, remember, we're weird.
And you're weird.
So why not be weird together? See you next time.